Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford here. A little bit later this hour, we're going to also be talking with Representative Matt Krause, because he has written a letter to the governor, and we will be a little bit later even talk about that. Those of you in the state of Texas, the governor is going to issue some of the guidelines, but I thought we would start off, Penna, talking about some of the guidelines yesterday. We have been waiting for what is the president going to do? How are we going to roll this out? What is the end game? What is the exit strategy? How can we get America back on its feet? And so if people have not had a chance to look at those guidelines, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. Now, unfortunately, there's a glitch here. So when you click on See More, you can scroll down to a section that actually shows Victory for Religious Liberty Guidelines, and then there's a big space, and then Read More. Well, that's where the guidelines are, so hopefully we'll fix that by this hour. But if you catch the one that says Read More, between the states and houses worship battle over coronavirus restrictions, and the one on victory and religious liberty, all of which we're going to talk about with our friend Kelly Shackelford in great detail at 1 o'clock, you have the guidelines. And I think the guidelines, first of all, make some sense, and it was, I think, encouraging to hear that the presentation of the guidelines came from Dr. Deborah Birx, and that also Anthony Fauci signed off on these. So it's going to be hard for the press, although I'm sure they're going to try to say that, well, these are guidelines the president wants, but these aren't what medical officials and experts want. But these make sense. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, I like the very beginning. They had something, I heard it first on television. They were talking about gating, and I didn't know what gating was. And it just sounded so restrictive that it kind of got me upset. But then when I listened, you know, they have these criteria, a downward trajectory of influenza-like illnesses reported within a 14-day period. So that's going down. And also of COVID-like cases reported within a 14-day period. So you want to see these downward trajectories of new cases before you start with these phases of opening things up. And I mean, it makes total sense. And as much as we're very anxious to get businesses opened up, you don't want to do it at a time when it's a few days too early, perhaps, or a week too early, or whatever, and you've missed your window where it would have been better to wait. So, you know, I like this. I think it's good. And then there's 3 different phases for it, and they're going to take a long time to get to the third one. But I think, you know, your care that you take in the first phase will, I think, speed the time that your area will go into the second phase. And we can talk about the opening up of these. But what I really liked was hearing the president say, okay, this is going to be up to the governors. I'm just, you know, I'm verbally opening this up, but every governor is going to make his own plan for his own state, and that's going to start in Texas, I think, this afternoon or tomorrow.
Yes. Well, and let's, if we can, when we go to the national broadcast in about an hour, recognize that there are certain states, Nebraska is one, South Dakota is another, where those 2 governors, both of whom I believe are Republican. I know the one in Nebraska is, and I believe the woman there in South Dakota is a Republican.
Kristi Noem.
So in both cases, they're being criticized by the Democrats. But if you look at some of those states, and I've started looking at various counties even in the state. I'll use Nebraska because one of my bookkeepers is from Nebraska. There are just whole sections where they have never found a person that is tested positive for COVID-19. Now, that could be they haven't tested enough, but I think in some respects you could see how the rollout is going to be very different in Nebraska, South Dakota, maybe even Oklahoma, Kansas, than it is in New York or Washington or California. Is that
Do
fair?
you think it would be different even in different regions of the states?
Yes, that's another question that I think we'll have to talk about with Matt Krause, because last time I looked at it, and this has been a week or two, we had, I think, half of the counties in the state of Texas that had not found a COVID-19 case. So even if that's 1/4, you can see there are places out in West Texas or other places that I think could actually roll out differently. And this is why, again, federalism makes some sense, doesn't it?
It does. And, President Trump kind of spoke quite authoritatively one day this week.
Oh,
and then the
okay,
next
we have
day,
to talk about that.
and then, that worried some people. I mean, those of us that know how he operates, we just kind of looked at that and went, oh, okay. And Kelly can talk about the constitutionality of what he said. There's some ways in which it was actually true.
Or not.
But, yeah,
Or not.
but maybe you don't want to. But the next day was when he came out, or maybe it was 2 days later, that with, this piece of paper that you can get online
Yes,
at
right. Got it
pointofview.net,
for you.
Opening Up America again. And it was stressed that it's the governors. It's up to the governors to do this, and they're going to take into consideration. Yes, they'll talk with the White House about it, but it's going to be up to them.
Well, and again, that gets us back to federalism because, Kelly, as we well recognize, I think there's still a 10th Amendment out there that says the powers that are not enumerated and delegated to the federal government reserved to the states and the people. So most of the time the president's been accurate, but for some reason on Monday he just went off saying power is absolute. And there was a sense in which I had to admit later he's partially right, because later on he says, I control the purse strings kind of idea. And I thought, remember back when even you had Richard Nixon, then Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter wanted to implement a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Yeah. They said, well, we really can't do that, but what we'll do is we'll not give you federal highway funds if you don't implement that. So there is a carrot and stick, but still the president was way off target on Monday, wasn't he?
Well, what's so weird about that? I mean, he just, when they attack him, he says things, right? But the reality is, I mean, all the Democrats, the entire time he's president, the whole danger that we're supposedly in is that he was going to take over and become a dictator. He was going to amass power. And he's been given the opportunity to do that, and he's refused. It's the liberals who have been screaming that the federal government needs to take all this over, and he's resisted every step of the way. He said, no, it's the governors. So I hated to see him say that one thing because it kind of ruined a perfect record so far through all of this when the pressure was for him to take over. I think this is the way it should be because I want the people making these decisions to be subject to the people of their state.
Well said.
Because I think most people think that we need to get back to work. That, look, people are smart. They can know how to follow the guidelines to try to keep one another as healthy as possible. But this idea of destroying lifelong businesses left and right by bureaucrats who have to pay no cost themselves, that's got to end. And again, I appreciate that even Governor Abbott has resisted the calls to do a statewide shutdown. And that would be nonsense. I mean, because there are parts of Texas everybody is totally spread out. So, but there was heavy pressure and anger and all this and all the news media. And so good for him. And I hope that today when he comes out with his recommendations that he's moving the same really strong direction of people need to get back to work. We need to be safe and smart, but we need to get back to work.
If nothing else, a lot of people probably couldn't have told you who their county judge was, but I think most people in Dallas know who the county judge is. I think most people in Collin County figured out who the county judge is because all of a sudden those people are in the news. So let's take a break. We come back before we get to Matt Krause a little bit later. One of the articles we've posted is by Phil Graham about the stimulus. And some people said maybe the people that need to get back to work are Congress because we've run out of money for the Paycheck Protection Program, too. So we'll talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
G.K. Chesterton once observed, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. Dennis Prager starts off with that quote to illustrate that nature has become a substitute God for many today. It's not surprising. Many pagan religions have some form of nature worship. They worship the sun god, the moon god, or the goddess of fertility. Today, there's a religious foundation to the environmental movement. We need to protect Mother Earth. Back in the 1970s, James Lovelock developed the Gaia hypothesis and more recently noted that environmentalism has become a religion. But nature worship has run into some tough times with this virus pandemic. Nature can be beautiful, but nature can also be brutal. Alfred Tennyson described nature as red in tooth and claw. There are no moral laws. It's the survival of the fittest. So how should Christians think about nature? Well, first, nature is part of the fallen world and should not be worshipped. G.K. Chesterton explained, nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. Second, in Genesis 1:28, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Being fruitful, that is having children, is just the opposite of what environmentalists would allow. One of my professors at Yale was the founder of Zero Population Growth, dedicated to limiting the number of children that could be born. Moreover, environmentalists and animal rights activists reject the idea that humans should subdue nature and have dominion over the earth. An article by Lynn White in the 1960s even blamed Christians and this passage in Genesis for our environmental problems. This pandemic is a reminder that nature is not our friend and nature is not our God. The Christian worldview is the true picture of reality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, listen, we can talk about Congress for just a few minutes. One of the articles we've posted here is the stimulus could crush the recovery. That's one that Penna Dexter had seen in the Wall Street Journal. And I know since many of you don't subscribe to the Wall Street Journal like we do, that's why we post it in its entirety so you can read it. If you went to try to find it right now, you wouldn't be able to do so. This comes, of course, from Phil Gramm, who we all know around the table, the former chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, and, of course, another individual that is partner of U.S. Policy Metrics. But, Penna, what about this? Because he's arguing that maybe we should put the brakes on the stimulus. What's his thought?
Yeah, he is still very much of a thought leader in economics in Texas and for the country. And periodically his pieces are published in the Wall Street Journal. This is with Michael Solon, who is a partner of U.S. Policy Metrics, and they write these great pieces. This one, it kind of brought up something that was it was intuitive in a sense that how many more stimulus packages are we going to need? You know, they always talk about like now an infrastructure package, which that was not a good idea under Obama in the recovery. I mean, there wasn't even the ability to get that started. There weren't shovel-ready jobs. So, you know, I don't like that idea. I think that should be done differently. But on this, new government borrowing, you know, if you continue it, will consume the oxygen needed once the recovery is underway. In other words, in the early summer, when we're back and some of the businesses are back, they're going to need capital, and they're going to need to raise capital. They'll be competing directly with the federal government for funding if the government just keeps on borrowing to do these stimulus programs. we have 3 of them that have already been passed. One of them, the Paycheck Recovery Act, has run out of money already. And I mean, I think the fact that it has run out of money means that this was a real need, and it probably will really help the economy get back. So I am for refilling that, putting the gas pump in and refilling the paycheck. It's already been passed. Of course, we can talk later about how the Democrats are opposing that and
Yes.
why. But you know, it was just, you don't want to hamper the recovery. You don't. The worry is, I think, is that the government is going to become the provider of so many things for so many people because they are stepping in right now. And so, you know, as we're starting to see things open up now, and this was probably written before Trump made his announcement yesterday that things were opening up, but they were foreseeing that. And you just want to do everything you can. Anything you do as a federal government is to get the economy and private enterprise back. You don't want to take over for it. And, you know, that whole idea of baking in big government, we don't want that. And so if they would just hold back, let these 3 programs that they've already passed do their work, and then, you know, let businesses start operating the way they're supposed to, and entrepreneurs start being creative of how they come back, I think it would be a lot better. He says if another massive spending bill is passed, the capacity of private businesses and banks to lead the recovery could be smothered. In such an environment, it would only be a short leap for Democrats to demand a Depression-esque recovery program and call for the Federal Reserve to serve as recovery lender. And you don't want that. The other 2 things that are risks with this government borrowing, continued borrowing, is interest rates going way up.
Yes.
And inflation.
Inflation.
We haven't worried about that for a long time, but that is a real risk with what is going on now with the Fed and with the borrowing that we're having to do these programs.
So again, just to use one of his lines here, that when you talk about this, these 3 stimulus packages will increase federal spending by half, quadruple the deficit, and spend twice as much as the existing tax revenue, and trigger the largest monetary expansion since the Civil War. Not something you want to do any more of.
Well, you're going to remember this, but we were all sitting together like this when the George Bush kind of
yes.
crashed.
I know where you're going.
And he had this quote where he said, "I have violated free market principles to save the free market economy." And you talk about head exploding. I mean, you know, no, you know, violating free market principles doesn't save the free market economy. It actually hampers the free market economy. Right. And now this one is a little different because the government is the one that shut people's business down.
This is like destroying a hurricane or something.
Yes, and so there is some difference. But this stimulus this package after package after package. I mean, this is damaging. Penna's article wasn't on this, but the other problem is there are going to be people that are incentivized not to go back to work.
Yep.
They get more money by
do.
not going back to work. I mean, this is the insanity. And when the Republicans caught this in the bill and thought there'd be a quick fix, the Democrats kind of all smiled at them like that was a good thing, that they had tricked them and this is not what you want to get the economy going again. And now I do think I think they made a mistake with the Paycheck Protection Plan. Mm-hmm. And that is, it wasn't just for distress. It was for everybody. It was supposed to be a stimulus. And so everybody applied, and now they're out of money. And so, I mean, I really think if they would have been wise about that, they would have said any of this, because there's some businesses that are doing just great right now. I mean, FedEx does not need, help. And you just start thinking through some of the grocery stores, it really should be people, a lot of these special, very small businesses. I know a number of these people who have built this business their whole life. I'm thinking of somebody we know, that's in danger of losing their business, and you would think, no way, them? I mean, they've got restaurants all over the place, and they're doing great, and it's a wonderful Christian family, and they told us, they said, we think we're probably going to have to close. That's just, that's what you want to help get them through a couple of months and let them come through the other side of this, because we don't want to turn around when we're through this and have people who have lost their family business. So I'm glad that we're now talking about opening things up, because I think just the whole philosophy, the psychology, everybody needs to be looking that direction. And I think it's really important. And I think more, so-called bills by Congress that spend more tax money and make the federal government essentially a competitor for businesses to get back to work is the last thing we need.
I'd love to get both of your comments about the fact that because there was an attempt to try to put another $250 billion into the Paycheck Protection Program, there ran into a, if you will, brick wall came from the Democrats. Penna, explain what was happening there.
They wanted to add a few things to it. They didn't really, what should be done, what makes sense. I mean, it's kind of going back on what we just said, that we shouldn't spend more money. But that particular program, that Paycheck Protection, is well thought out. It's good, and it will, just as Kelly said, it will keep businesses afloat so that they can come back. And, think of restaurants. They can't open, and they, we need them back later. So anyway, so they want to spend money for they want part of this to be money for hospitals, and they want to have money for city and state governments. They want to put that into this, and it just increases the scope of the bill, and it's something that needs to be debated separately. This needs to happen quickly in order for it to work. If it doesn't happen quickly, then it might as well not happen.
I think what Nancy Pelosi has done is really disgraceful. She delayed. I mean, this bill was going to go through a week earlier.
Yes. And
Schumer was fine until all of a sudden Nancy Pelosi decided she was going to take things over and try to add all these other things to the bill, which, were not agreed to. And she slowed this down. The reason that most people don't have that money yet is because of Nancy Pelosi. Mm-hmm. And now she's doing it again. Now that they're running out of money, she sees another opportunity where she can get other things added onto the bill that have nothing to do. And all she's doing is delaying these businesses getting the money, which means many of them are collapsing. I mean, if she was president, I would be moving for impeachment right now, because what she's done is really, really petty. This is a serious thing for these businesses, and for her to play politics with this about things that have nothing to do with the crisis that we're going through is really disgraceful.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will focus a little time and attention on the state of Texas, because we will have with us Matt Krause, represents a district that is over in the Tarrant County area, District 93. He has written an open letter to the governor, which came out a couple of days ago, and now I have in front of me another open letter from a number of grassroots individuals as well. And especially since today we are certainly talking about the criteria for the federal government, I think the governor's going to come up with one as well. So I wanted to give you an advanced look at that as we talk with our friend Matt Krause right after this.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, it is Weekend Edition, and Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford with us around the round table. And let me, as a program note, say that we are going to get into this whole issue of some of these religious liberty cases in about a half an hour. I wanted, of course, our national audience to hear all of the things that have been happening, especially since some of our listeners live in Mississippi and Kentucky and a number of others. So we will certainly get to that. And we've talked a little bit about the actual guidelines that the national government, through, of course, President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence and others have put forward. But I thought we'd focus some time and attention on the state of Texas for a couple of reasons. First of all, our good friend Matt Krause put together an open letter to the governor, and we will talk about that. Then I have one of these, Penna, that's an open letter from a number of grassroots leaders to Governor Abbott as well. And, of course, Governor Abbott has already announced that the schools will not meet again until the fall, which is really no surprise. But let's bring to the microphone here Matt Krause, who, of course, is a constitutional attorney, a college professor, as well as a representative representing the 93rd District in the state of Texas, which is primarily in the Tarrant County area. And if nothing else, Representative Matt Krause, always great to have you on the program with us.
Hey, thanks, Kerby. Always a pleasure to join you, and definitely your esteemed panel today as well.
We've got a great panel, but you have added to it, and we have focused most of our time and attention on the national level. Let's focus on the Texas state level, because most of the listeners this hour are in the state of Texas. And you wrote a very important set of principles, kind of 7 points to the governor. Explain those, because in some respects you would like to get America and especially the state of Texas back on its feet. So what do you propose?
Yeah, that's right. As we continue to see the effects of kind of shutting down our states for various reasons, it's starting to have certain effects and taking a toll in a different way than the pandemic would be. And so one of my day jobs is a community banker for a bank called Vista Bank, and we're helping a lot of small businesses with these PPP loans from the Small Business Administration. And these small business owners kept telling me, like, man, we keep getting shut down. We can't do anything. We got to get back working. We're just running out of money. We're running out of jobs for people to do, and so we're having to let so many people go. So it just kind of reminded me, like, let's figure out a way to open Texas back up, but do it in a safe and responsible manner. And so that's what I tried to do in that open letter to the governor. Gave him 7 recommendations how I thought we could do that. And from his press conference just a little while ago, it sounds like some of the things that I put in that letter are things that we are going to see in the next couple of days, which I was very gratified about.
Matt, that's exactly what I was going to ask you is what are the things that you suggested did he include today? And then what are the things that weren't in there that you might encourage him to add?
Yeah, one of the things that he included was that all schools are going to remain closed for the remainder of the school year. With the way things have gone, there's just no way and no safe way to start that engine back up this academic year. So schools will not be getting back together for the academic year of 2019-2020. We're going to put all of our focus towards 2020 and 2021. One of the other things was open retail up a little bit, which we had encouraged him to do. And he said once we open up retail, hopefully in another week or so, we can start looking at restaurants and opening up some of those things, which was really good. And then opening up state parks, which we had asked him to do. He said you need to wear a mask if you do that, but we're going to reopen all state parks. So those were really good. Some of the things I would still like to see us do is remove the distinction between essential and non-essential businesses, because everybody who works in what we have deemed a non-essential business, I can guarantee you it feels essential to them and their families and their livelihood. So I wish we could continue to remove that distinction. And then I know it's near and dear to your heart, Kelly, some of the prohibitions on religious services didn't touch on anything on that at this point, but I'm hoping we get more clarification on that as we go down the line.
Right.
Matt, it is essential also that people work. I mean, if you're dividing between essential and non-essential, it is essential that our businesses get back to work in Texas and succeed, isn't it?
That's right. And it's like somebody said the other day, the only minor surgery that anybody has is on somebody else. It's never minor surgery when it's you. So it's never non-essential when it's you and your livelihood and feeding and providing for your family, and also those people who patron your business. So there's a reason they come there. And so I think we need to get rid of that distinction, because we're seeing massive unemployment numbers. We're seeing incredible amount of businesses that aren't going to be able to come back. And we can balance all of that with with safety measures, with health standards, with increased testing. And I think we can strike the right balance. We're not putting anybody at increased risk or more harm, but also able to get Texans back to work. And I think that needs to be our goal.
Matt, what about areas of the state? Do you have an opinion on whether we let some areas that have really not been hit go back quicker to normalcy than others?
Yeah, that's actually one of the things I think President Trump at the federal level and then Governor Abbott at the local level have done really well. Is so far they've taken, for the most part, a regional approach. If there's hot spots in New York and New Orleans, then you have to treat those a little differently. If there's hot spots in Dallas County and Harris County, but not necessarily out in Amarillo or other parts of the state, then maybe you do have a different approach. So, yes, I'm hoping we don't have these blanket one-size-fits-all. But if you show certain metrics, and that's why I even put in my letter to the governor that only certain counties should have some of these restrictions still in place, the social distancing ones. If you're one of the 254 counties where you're not seeing any type of coronavirus activity at all, maybe you're freed up to do even more than other people in the state.
Matt, one of the things I know that you're known for is your strong faith. And so I've got to think you've been watching what different churches, how they're handling this. And what are some things you've seen, both in serving people and in, maybe doing services in unique ways, whether it's a drive-in service or something else? I've just got to think you've seen or heard of things that made you proud of what churches are doing. And I know our listeners would love to hear some of those examples.
Yeah, absolutely, Kelly. That's a great question. First of all, I want to thank you for what you're doing when local governments are trying to impede people from being able to still worship and exercise their religious liberty in certain ways. So thanks for the work you're doing there. But you're right. The church is always going to grow and thrive and adapt. And I've been really encouraged by what we've seen. I know the president a couple weeks ago said he was going to watch the Harvest Church with Greg Laurie online that Sunday, and Greg Laurie put out that over 1.3 million people watched that service, and I think about 2,000 people came to know the Lord just from that one service. And so even though we're not able to get together, the Lord is still moving and working, and I guarantee you Harvest has never had 1.3 million people on a Sunday in their church, but they had them at that church service. We had a local church here the other day, as you said, a drive-in service on Easter, where everybody came in their cars. They sat there. They had the music up on a sound stage. The pastor preached. Everybody was social distance. You got that feeling of community. Nobody got out of their cars, but they were still able to get together. I know Sunday school classes have used the technology that we have now with Zoom and other things to stay connected with each other. The youth group at my church, my kids get on Zoom to see their friends and to talk to their youth group leaders. And so they're staying connected that way. And so it's been really amazing to see how the faith community has really banded together and said, hey, just because we can't get together in physical presence on Sunday doesn't mean we can't get together spiritually and worship together on Sundays. And it's just been real heartening to watch.
I might add one other quick thing that's sort of part of the faith community, and that is homeschooling. Everyone's a homeschooler now, and you have to wonder if some of the online programs that are being developed and just the experience of it, because yes, it's challenging, but it's very gratifying, and kids learn so much quicker at home than they do at school all day. So it may give a boost. I just have no doubt, Matt, that it will give a boost to homeschooling.
Sure. Let me jump in because we have to take one of those mandatory breaks, and I want to get some of his comments. But while we're talking about kids, if you actually follow Matt Krause on either Instagram or Twitter, you see that he's standing in front of his front door with Jeremiah and Hannah Sue and James and Gracie and Ruthie thanking all the individuals, whether it's grocers or healthcare workers or firefighters or truckers. And so it has got to be a really cute picture and really one that is very encouraging. So that's another reason to follow Matt Krause, and you can certainly find out more about him by going to our website at pointofview.net. We come back, let's talk a little bit more about that because there are some very significant changes that are going to take place. And I'd like to talk to a representative who next year, I'm sure he'll be reelected, is going to have to figure out how we're going to pay for all this. Have you noticed the price of gas right now? I the other day paid $1.19, and when you are usually expecting that it's anywhere from $80 a barrel to $100 a barrel, and then it's like $20 a barrel. That's going to affect the rainy day fund and how they're going to be able to pay for some of this. I think Matt Krause is going to have to say no a lot next year, but we'll find out from him right after this.
In one of those Zoom get-togethers that have become a social lifeline lately, participants were asked to reveal their worst and best experiences during life in the coronavirus lockdown. My worst is an underlying angst and sleeplessness I can't shake as I watched businesses and workers idled and try to swallow the passage of trillions of dollars in relief and stimulus. I could go on about this, and I did, starting our time together on a real downer. My fellow participants rescued the meeting as they began describing the good things they're experiencing as a result of the current limitations. People spoke of how they're finding more time for reflection on their relationship with the Lord. Some see themselves dropping pretenses of control. We find it uncomfortable, even painful, but good to learn to trust God more. Others said they appreciate relaxed dinners with spouses and family members and opportunities to do some long-postponed purging and organizing at home. Many of us agreed we're reaching out more to people who are important to us, often calling rather than emailing or texting. And folks mentioned some sweet opportunities to communicate the gospel and provide help to others. The Wall Street Journal's Peggy Noonan predicted some positives for the nation in her column last weekend. First, she quoted a social psychologist who says, hardship generally makes people stronger. And Ms. Noonan wondered, could what we're enduring leave us less polarized? Not in Washington, she clarified the question, but across America. She wrote, we need to be easier on each other. Turn down the judgment 80% or 90%. I'm rooting for getting the economy opened up sooner rather than later. The spending and the limitations on freedom must be curtailed before they're baked in. But this era of lockdown is forcing practices like more online education and homeschooling, telemedicine, and common-sense immigration restrictions that could prove worthwhile and remain, becoming a silver lining to this dark cloud. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we still have with us Representative Matt Krause, and then we're going to really get into some of these religious liberty cases. Kelly's been eager. He's got the order, the injunction, all sorts of stuff, so it's going to be really fascinating. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford in studio for the entire 3 hours, but we have with us Representative Matt Krause. And Matt, let me just ask that question I sort of posed for everybody to think about. I'm sure that many of you will be reelected, and when you get together in January, the circumstances for the state of Texas are going to be very different, and in some respects, you're already probably starting to think about what that's going to mean when you start putting together the budget for the 2 years for the state of Texas.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a great point, Kirby. We a lot of the members of the legislature had a conference call with the comptroller, Glenn Hager, a few weeks back, and it was a very sobering call.
Yes.
And outlook for what's coming up. And so, we still don't know exactly what's going to happen. Is this recovery going to be more V-shaped? And if it is, maybe the damage isn't done that much. If it's a little bit more of a U or even a little suffers even a little bit more than we're hoping, then Texas could have a huge shortfall in revenue because it's not only the pandemic, but it's also the oil prices that have dropped precipitously with Saudi Arabia and Russia having a little bit of a war going on there. So those two combined at the same time, the stoppage of the economy plus this oil fight has really put Texas in a precarious place when it comes to the economy.
What is there any chance, Matt? I mean, I know most listeners probably don't pay as much attention to know that the Texas legislature only meets once every 2 years. Because of what's going on here, do you think there's any chance maybe that the governor would call a special session? They would pull back on budgets and spending. And I mean, I'm thinking of this for a couple reasons. Number one, because I think it would be a logical thing to do. I think it's what every other business, nonprofit, everybody is doing right now. They're having to redo their budgets and all this. But it also seems like it's a real opportunity for you guys who are more fiscally conservative to put some rational spending limits in, while really the other side can't really argue with you, unless they want to bankrupt the economy.
Right.
Let
and
no crisis go to waste, Matt.
That's a reverse of that, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. In terms of a special session, I'd heard some talk about that for a while. Now with the governor coming out and thinking that the worst is behind us in terms of the initial spike of this pandemic at the beginning, can we get things more back to normal so we don't have to do that? If we see another wave of this or a bigger hit to the economy or Texas livelihoods, I do think a special session is a possibility. Right now, I don't think it's really on his radar. But, Kelly, you're dead on that this should open many of our eyes to the fact that we've got to put some kind of structural spending restraints in place so we don't get in a place like some of the other liberal states around the country who are just swimming in debt and now having to compound that with what's going on with the pandemic right now. We would do very well next session to come in and pass a bill that Kelly Hancock, a state senator in Tarrant County, has pushed the last 3 sessions, which is putting spending limits in place so the government doesn't outlive its means, which means we have enough in reserve for these hard-hit, unprecedented times to navigate that without just being decimated.
Matt, when you look at this on the federal level with this rollout of opening back up, you know that the Democrats are loaded for bear to attack once cases start increasing again, which they will do. The whole idea was to push things out ahead so that we would have capacity to take care of people in our healthcare system. So to the extent that's going to happen in hotspots and in the nation as a whole, I mean, we could have some of that in Texas, too. So do you have any thoughts about how prepared our state is to weather that bad news that could come of some increase in cases?
Yeah, I think the really good news from Governor Abbott's press conference from just a little while ago is that our hospital capacity is exactly where it needs to be. We're not overwhelmed. We're not at the margins at all. And so even if we did see a spike at this point, we still have the hospital capacity we need to take care of that. We still have the PPE that we need for our healthcare workers to take care of that. And I think you couple that with an increased testing. We're going to continue to test. We need to test antibody test, immunity test, regular pandemic test. We must keep testing, folks. But the more we do that, the more results we see, the better we get at testing, coupled with continuing to social distance, to keep good hygiene and things like that. I think we can do our part to make sure that second wave doesn't come, or if it does, like you said, flatten it enough to where it's not overwhelming our state or our counties in terms of healthcare needs in that crisis.
Matt, where do people, I mean, I know one of the problems has been the CDC kind of messed up the testing at the beginning and slowed everything down. And now, fortunately, private enterprise has come to work, and we've got our wonderful companies coming up with all kinds of choices. I think yesterday or day before it was even the saliva test. But how if
Right.
somebody is in Texas and either they think they might have it and they want to get a test, where do they go? Or what if they just want to find out if they've had it? The antibody test. Is that something that I know it is actually. Somebody told me the other day they went and got one to see if they'd had it, and I was thinking like, well, I wonder where they went.
Yeah.
Do you know where people go to get the testing on both levels, whether they think they might have it or a situation where they wonder if they did have it?
Yes, a lot of the private labs, that's where you can get that at this point. So I know of some constituents who have reached out to private labs to say, hey, are you doing any kind of this testing? You can also go to the state website, dshs.gov. That's dshs.gov. And that should give you all the information you need for testing. I know in Tarrant County, they're unveiling new drive-through testing in Fort Worth and Arlington next week that will allow you to go through to see if you have any kind of symptoms or warning signs for coronavirus, so you know what to do from that. And so our testing capabilities continuing to be ramped up, and you can look for those drive-through testings as more and more becoming available in your area. But again, dshs.gov is the best place to go.
So again, some great opportunities. Matt, I certainly thank you for joining us today. This has just been educational, and we already are putting up a link right now so that people can find some of that to Homeland Security and some of the others that will have that information so that we can all get tested. But if nothing else, Matt, thank you for joining us. Thank you for writing that letter, and we'll pay attention to what the governor's guidelines are. In just a few minutes, we're going to be talking about those national guidelines.
And thank you, Matt, for your not only your service, but your stance as somebody who never moves off who you represent in Christ, and you're not ashamed of that, and you stand for it, and you're an example of what we need a lot more in this country, and I just want to thank you for what you do.
Well, thanks, Kelly. I appreciate that. And going off what Penna said earlier about everybody's homeschooling now, if you've ever complained about prayer being taken out of school and Bible being taken out of school, it's not in your school right now, then something's wrong on your end.
Great line.
Yeah.
I think some of these homeschool
make
teachers
sure you're
want a
taking that
break,
opportunity.
but that's other than that. That's another story. Well, just great. Matt,
That's
thanks
right.
for joining us. We look forward to the next opportunity, but we need to take one of those mandatory breaks. So when we come back, Kelly, I'll come to you first because I suspect everybody's been waiting to hear about some of these victories for religious liberty. We've posted a couple of articles there. And, of course, we've also posted those guidelines, which are from the federal government. Since we've talked with Matt Krause, we'll see what kind of guidelines we have from the state of Texas, and we'll post those maybe on Monday so that we don't confuse people as we get back into some of those issues. Let me encourage you, though, to go to the website. If you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to read some of these articles, you certainly can do so. We also have a take action item we're going to talk about a little bit later, protecting our pharmaceutical supply chain. That is an action item, which actually Penna Dexter wrote about in her Viewpoints commentary a couple weeks ago, and so we're encouraging you to contact your two senators. So we'll talk more about that, but we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We certainly have a lot to talk about today. First of all, we have posted the actual guidelines that the president released yesterday, which we will talk about a little bit later. We have a very good piece that Penna Dexter called my attention to out of the Wall Street Journal about whether more of this stimulus spending would be a good idea or whether that might crush the recovery. We will get into a little bit later one of the articles, which are one of many of the sort of the backlash you have to disobey, as one of them are saying, as well as some of the pushback on that. But we're going to focus our time and attention on a couple of articles we posted here: a victory for religious liberty, the Louisville church service issue, and if we have not talked about this enough, we'll certainly talk about it today. We talked about the King James Bible Baptist Church in Greenville, Mississippi, the pastor there, and actually posted some material about that. But I thought it would be good for Kelly to tell us also the backstory of what came out of Louisville, Kentucky, where the mayor, Greg Fisher, said that anyone attending even these drive-in Easter services would be forced to quarantine for 14 days. You might say, how would they do that? Well, the police officers actually took down the license plate numbers, not only of the attendees, but even some of the people in the media. So last Saturday night, Kelly's going to give us the whole story, U.S. District Judge Justin Walker issued a restraining order. Now you have the actual writing that he put together. He said the mayor's decision is stunning, and it is beyond all reason unconstitutional. Kelly, give us the backstory here.
Well, we've been dealing with a lot of these orders. I mean, normally laws in our country are produced through the legislative process where there's back and forth, where people can look, they can say, hey, this is a problem. You know, what's happening now is people are like writing these orders in their basement or something. You know, it's some little local mayor or county commissioner you've never heard of or somebody else. And so it's not going through the process. So a lot of these orders are ridiculous. And we're getting a lot of those fixed. We just send a letter and say, you know, you're discriminating against the church and how you're doing this ordinance. You know, for instance, there's a lot of places we'll run into. It's like, well, you can go to a fast food place and pick up, you know, meals. But a church, they don't say church, but they just, the way they write it. But churches only are banned from providing food to people in the same way. Well, you can't do that. You know, that's discriminatory. So we're sending letters. But then all of a sudden, they seem to almost start getting worse. I guess they started to realize the power they have, you know, and the new petty dictators decide that, you know, they're going to really put the church in its place. I mean, which the thing about this is what's going on is so unconstitutional, but it's so foolish. I mean, the church is the one that's actually providing most of the service, the care, most of the hospitals people are going to are religious hospitals. They're the ones finding out, you know, the elderly, the needy, the poor, and they're trying to get things to them. So it's just bizarre in so many ways. But in Louisville, and this is happening around the country, the mayor there literally banned the church from having a drive-in service. If people don't know what that is, people drive in their cars to the church parking lot. They then listen either over a radio frequency on their radio, or in one of our cases, it was a small church, and the pastor was just speaking very loudly, but they could hear in their cars with their windows rolled up. And again, and I said this on TV, unless the CDC has not told us that you can catch the coronavirus from an automobile. This is absolute nonsense. The idea that you can't be in your car at the church parking lot is just insane. And it got worse in Kentucky because then the governor started saying that anybody who was in the church parking lot on Sunday, the police were going to be writing down everybody's license plates. And we're like, everybody thought, what is happening? Are we in
Because they were going to
China?
quarantine them
Yes.
afterwards.
Then they would then forcibly quarantine you in your home for 14 days. So again, this is happening all over the country, and we knew we had to do something, especially this was an Easter service. And by the way, just so people know again, a lot of times these drive-in services are very important because there are people in the church, whether they're poor or elderly, who can't get a streaming service. And so they literally have no church service if you don't provide some creative ideas. And so they have every right to do this, and they were trying to do this as a way to be together and yet to be very safe. They met every CDC guideline. So we filed on Good Friday and got a decision on Saturday, and it is a really, really good decision. I saw this sort of shared all over the country on social media and everywhere else, but I'll just read people the opening paragraph because I think it gives you a feel.
You get the idea.
On Holy Thursday, an American mayor criminalized the communal celebration of Easter. That sentence is one that this court never expected to see outside the pages of a dystopian novel or perhaps the pages of The Onion. But 2 days ago, citing the need for social distancing during the pandemic, Louisville's Mayor Greg Fisher ordered Christians not to attend Sunday services, even if they remained, and he emphasizes this, in their cars for worship. And even though it's Easter, the mayor's decision is stunning, and it is, beyond all reason, unconstitutional. That's a pretty good start to the opinion. We knew when we saw this Saturday night, I think this is very good. And I think this is really, really, really important. I think it's historic. We know what our Constitution says. We know how religious freedom works. But we've never had constitutional law in a pandemic before. There have been no legal decisions. This is the first one. And people all over the country were wondering, what is happening? We want there to be health and safety, but this seems to have gotten out of control and we're losing our liberty. And everybody was wondering, is something going to happen? Are we going to remember who we are? To have this judge write the opinion reminding us of our constitutional structure and the rule of law and putting somebody who's abusing their government power in their place was real. I refer to it, it's sort of the shot heard around the world or whatever. This is the order heard around the country because people that aren't even religious from all over the country were really responding to this. And it really did remind everybody again, no, local government officials can't do whatever they want to do. We live in a constitutional system, and religious freedom is the basis for this country. And so I encourage people, they can, read this on, they can go to pointofview.net, and we've got, I think, the press release that went out, and it's got the order where you can link to it. This is the type of thing to share. This is just the beginning. We've got some other stories that are even worse, believe it or not. But this is great, great, great news. And it's the only opinion, even to this point, in the middle of this pandemic about our First Amendment freedoms.
I might just mention that one of the links even allows you to watch the interview that you did with Tucker Carlson. You didn't say so much, but Pastor did. And, of course, we've also posted before John Fund saying in some places Easter isn't being celebrated, it's being fined. That would be $500 fines. And some of the church growers showed up and found that there were nails out there for them and preventing them from even getting into the parking lot.
That's really scary.
So we'll come back and get into a little more detail on that. But also, I'd love to get your thoughts about this. 1-800-351-1212. It's Weekend Edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
G.K. Chesterton once observed, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. Dennis Prager starts off with that quote to illustrate that nature has become a substitute God for many today. It's not surprising. Many pagan religions have some form of nature worship. They worship the sun god, the moon god, or the goddess of fertility. Today, there's a religious foundation to the environmental movement. We need to protect Mother Earth. Back in the 1970s, James Lovelock developed the Gaia hypothesis and more recently noted that environmentalism has become a religion. But nature worship has run into some tough times with this virus pandemic. Nature can be beautiful, but nature can also be brutal. Alfred Tennyson described nature as red in tooth and claw. There are no moral laws. It's the survival of the fittest. So how should Christians think about nature? Well, first, nature is part of the fallen world and should not be worshipped. G.K. Chesterton explained, nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. Second, in Genesis 1:28, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Being fruitful, that is having children, is just the opposite of what environmentalists would allow. One of my professors at Yale was the founder of Zero Population Growth, dedicated to limiting the number of children that could be born. Moreover, environmentalists and animal rights activists reject the idea that humans should subdue nature and have dominion over the earth. An article by Lynn White in the 1960s even blamed Christians and this passage in Genesis for our environmental problems. This pandemic is a reminder that nature is not our friend and nature is not our God. The Christian worldview is the true picture of reality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, talking about some of these religious liberty cases. In just a minute, we'll get to what happened in Greenville, Mississippi, King James Bible Baptist Church, and we have some great material there on the website, which, again, that's one place where you hear this police officer saying, your rights are suspended. But just before we get to that, let's go back to Kentucky for just a minute. We have listeners in Kentucky, and they said, okay, so you have the mayor warning Christians that indeed they're going to be forced into quarantine. Then you have the district court judge, Justin Walker, issues a restraining order. But all this happened, that was Saturday night. What happened Sunday morning at Easter?
Well, CNN asked me that question. They called me Monday or so to do an interview, and they were asking, what happened, thinking that, since all these police officers were writing down license plates and everything else, that maybe they would be out there, trying to be all on top of them. And no, I said the police did come by. What they did is drive by, look at the pastor, and give him a thumbs up. And I said to the CNN guy, I love this country. Because those police officers, most police officers don't want to be involved in anything like that. Now, I will say, the lawsuit is still going. We had a hearing Tuesday in federal court before Judge Walker, and the injunction is still in place because otherwise we don't know what they'll do because they have not agreed that they won't do this again. And until they do, we got to continue with the lawsuit. So not really on behalf of just the On Fire Christian Church that we represent, but really this is all churches that are impacted by that.
And let me just mention that one of those articles is a First Liberty article on Judge Grant's restraining order. And then you can read that, and it will certainly get a smile on your face. You don't see very many orders written in that way. And then right beneath it takes us to the other story out of Mississippi in this particular case, because you were on the air with, of course, Charleston Hamilton, I guess is his name. King James Bible Baptist Church in Greenville, Mississippi.
I want to go to his church.
Yes, he sounds like quite a guy. Tell us more.
He's he's got a great story himself. I mean, he was into drugs and all kinds of things, and came to know the Lord and totally changed his life. This is a small African American church in Greenville, Mississippi, and what's happened in Greenville was just it's just even beyond my wildest imagination of bad. Number one, you've got the mayor issuing an order, and the order. I mean, the only thing, it's only like a paragraph or two long. It just says, here's the curfew. And then it aims at churches and says churches can't have services, even drive-in services. And you're like, what? Why are you aiming at churches? What are you doing? And then you think, well, maybe this guy's just nuts and nobody's going to carry this out. No. As you mentioned, they went to one church, issued $500 fines to everybody in their car. But what happened at King James Bible Baptist Church is they were going to have a Thursday night service before the Easter service. And again, this is a poor area. I mean, the pastors, Pastor Hamilton told me, he said, my mother wouldn't be able to watch, online. She doesn't have that capability. So if we didn't have this, she would have no service. And so what happens is, and again, I would encourage people, Go. I don't know where it is on Point of View. I know if you go to firstliberty.org, you spell out firstliberty.org, and you go down about 2/3 of the page and just look on the right, you'll see the Tucker Carlson interview. I highly encourage you to watch that interview and share that. People need it. This thing has gone like wildfire because everybody wants to see what that story is, and it's a great way to wake people up as to religious freedom. But what happened, and you can see the visuals if you go and look at this. You had about a total of 6 cars from the church meeting for this service. Yeah. And they're all in their cars with their windows rolled up, and they are surrounded by probably 8 police squad cars.
Were they social distancing? Those police?
They were not.
There were more police cars than there were cars.
Absolutely.
Yes, I saw that.
And they threatened the pastor and the parishioners with criminal prosecution if they did not leave. This is the church parking lot. So these people are in their cars, apart from one another, at the church parking lot, surrounded by police, telling them they're going to criminally charge them. One of the officers says on video, I mean, you can watch it. It's not like a theory, right? It's a white police officer from Mississippi telling a black pastor, quote, your rights are suspended.
Yep.
Excuse me?
Yes.
I'm like, he didn't really say that, did he? He did.
It's on video.
And so this is just crazy. And so, again, I encourage you, number one, watch the Tucker deal and share that, because it'll be a good way for you to educate other people why this is important. Update to this is we filed a lawsuit in federal district court, and we did that on, I guess it was Wednesday, by Wednesday night, the mayor had changed their position. But by the way, this is after refusing to back down for days. The mayor had gone out, said, we're not backing off. We don't want these drive-in services. Again, let me, if you're listening and this is like new to you, what they're saying is that 6 cars in the church parking lot with the windows up is a crime. Okay. By the way, that meets every CDC guideline. However, right down the street at the Walmart, 100 cars with people getting in and out of their cars, that's okay. I mean, the Sonic had more cars in line right across the street than the church did in their parking lot. And they're rolling down their windows.
Yes.
So there is zero public health interest in this. It is completely irrational, and it is aimed directly at the church. This is just massively unconstitutional, And so, fortunately, the mayor has finally come. I wouldn't say to his senses, because I don't know if he even why he did it, but he's decided he doesn't want this fight anymore because we filed a lawsuit. There's been another lawsuit filed, and the Attorney General of the United States, the Department of Justice, filed a statement of interest agreeing with our side. So they have backed down at this point. The lawsuits are still going because until we get a final resolution,
Sure.
we have to keep going. But those are just a few. We have more. There are a number of lawsuits we're looking at maybe having to file. It depends on what responses we get. So this is not going away. It's happening. And I think what's going to happen is now that we're moving away from the huge uptick and we're getting back, I think what's happening now is there are less arguments for some of the health arguments that were being made. Because if there are legitimate health issues, churches are really trying to meet those, right? But what we're going to see next is churches that are wanting to do things in a safe way and have more communal ability. And so I think we're going to, and I think it's going to be necessary for churches and pastors to sort of stand in their own and to insist that they be treated like everybody else and not as some sort of lower form of protection. Like in many states, the liquor store is essential, but not the church. And you can go on and on. I mean, it's really ridiculous how a number of these places they've been treating the church. But I think it's going to be really important as we're coming out of this that churches not allow freedoms to be sort of locked into place. That will be a long-term reduction in their freedoms. Because if it's allowed now, it'll be allowed from some other so-called emergency in the future, even if it's not legitimate. So it's very important that we, make sure that the freedoms are there, understanding that if there really are serious health issues and there's a narrowly drawn remedy to that applies equally to everybody, that's one thing. But all these other things are really reducing the authority and the legitimacy and the liberty of churches.
And I would say that you called it a sort of churches being treated as a lower institution with lower rights, in a sense. The rights are higher.
Mm-hmm.
And to protect the rights of religious liberty, I mean, we can talk about this in a future segment. They actually serve to help sort of the national understanding of all of our freedoms. Yep. And some of the freedoms of people that are even beyond religious liberties are being threatened now. And right. I think you're doing, it's hard to articulate this, but I feel that you're doing a great service to the entire body of freedoms that we have under the First Amendment by protecting these rights of these churches.
Amen. Yeah, I think when free exercise of religion, freedom of assembly, when we win these cases like we did in Louisville, that affects, everybody probably saw in North Carolina, they were told your right to protest has been suspended. Mm-hmm. I think this affects your right to protest and your First Amendment rights all across the board.
Well, we're going to need to take a break, and when we come back, we will talk about these guidelines that the president, the vice president have issued, and what does that mean? So we have a lot more to cover. We will do so right after this.
"2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford with us. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Just a minute, we're going to get to these guidelines that were set forth yesterday by the coronavirus group that actually were put forward first by the president, Donald Trump, then by the vice president, Mike Pence, but were actually described by Dr. Deborah Birx, as well as signed off by Anthony Fauci. So in some respects, there is agreement, even though the press, I think, will try to create some kind of division between the two. But let's take a phone call real quickly, because we were talking about this issue of religious liberty. So we'll go to Paul in the state of Texas. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Well, I was listening to where you mentioned it's all right to go into Walmart, and I think that puts a lot of context on this. You can go to a liquor store, and most people don't want to stand 6 feet away when they have a conversation. They'll sit there and talk to you 2.5 feet away. I've seen that repeatedly at Walmart, at the grocery stores, and you don't get tackled by a cop for doing that. But when they wanted to sit in their cars, they ended up with apparently the local government authorities or the police putting nails down that undoubtedly caused vandalism damage exceeding the requirements for a felony. So you have policemen or other government authorities committing felonies in order to apparently enforce the self-important, non-existent lawfulness of the governor's or the mayor's proclamation. And if the mayor's dog said that to me, it would have no more authority. So I think that the context of this is that he was deliberately targeting Christians. I bet you he didn't do this to a mosque, because if he did, he probably wouldn't be breathing very long.
Yes.
So if he didn't do it to a mosque, he did it to Christians.
Kelly, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Greenville mayor, I mean, that order, by the way, it's, I think I'm pretty sure we have it online where you can see the order as well, because it's in our press release when we filed the lawsuit and when we won. So you can go look at the actual order if you want. And the whole paragraph is only about churches. It doesn't even say houses of worship. It's churches. So if you're a synagogue, if you're a mosque, if you're anything else, so it's clearly discriminatory in great ways. I think the nails, I don't think anybody knows exactly where the nails came from. I think most people think it was from a neighbor who didn't like the church. I doubt the police officers would put down the nails like that. But still, I mean, they should have more wisdom and discretion. I mean, you've got a lot of the sheriffs in Michigan that are saying they are refusing to enforce some of the ridiculous things that the governor is doing there. You know, like you can't go from, if you have a lake home and another
summer home,
you're not allowed to go.
Can't go to your relative's house.
Yeah,
Can't go to your neighbor's house.
That stuff. So a lot of the police officers, the law enforcement, have enough discretion to understand what they did in Mississippi. Though, I mean, it was not only that this little black church was surrounded by police squad cars. Every single police officer in the city was there.
What?
Yeah. So that tells you something about somebody has got some serious discretion issues, and I don't think I want them making decisions about anything where they're actually using their brain, because evidently it's been put aside somewhere. So we've got a lot of great police officers, and most of them have enough sense to not do this type of abusive behavior that violates the Constitution.
Yeah. I think another point to be made here is that during a time like this, I mean, this virus and everything that's happened with it has been a hard thing for everyone. And I mean, I know that I have access to a computer, so I get to go to my church online. And a lot of people do. I think the point that you made about the people in the country who can't do that, who don't have the ability to do that. I mean, they're talking about that in the schools too. In Houston, Texas, for instance, they weren't allowing kids to be tested or graded because some kids would be at a disadvantage because they didn't have computers at home. So it's the group, the demographic group in our society that the left claims to be the champion of, that is actually being discriminated against with this kind of draconian rulemaking. It's ridiculous. And so, I mean, I think it's so sweet to think about people driving to the church just to be together, even though they can't even, open their window. They're just being together. They're just showing, part of it is they're showing their their worship to the Lord by doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's completely un-American for that to be stopped in this way. And that's why what groups that are helping these churches to, get together and be able to do these things, what you're doing is, it's just such a, I don't even think people understand what a service that is, how it's shoring up freedoms that we hold dear in this country.
Well, and I wish, I think I was just thinking about this yesterday. I wish all the churches, all across the country would have a weekend. Maybe it's next weekend, not this coming weekend, but next weekend, where they do drive-in services as a way to because we're going to start coming out of this, and people are going to be allowed to go back to some of these events as long as there's some social distancing, and then eventually it'll be all the way back. But it seems like right now, when there are more limits on that, on what's safe as we're coming out of this in certain areas, that's something that everybody can do, and that the churches could do, all across the country. And it'd be fun to see, some movements like that, where it's kind of like we're going back to work, or we're going back to church, and not just online. We're going back. We're at the church. We're at the parking lot. We're together. I think something like that would be really neat.
One of the advantages of this is it establishes the legality of that, because my Sunday school class, last couple of weeks, I've done that with our own Sunday school class. And usually we only have about 20 cars, but I park there and we do broadcast it on radio, on a low-frequency FM radio, but also put it up on Zoom. So whether you have a tablet or a computer, or whether you just listen on the radio, you can do so. But I had somebody last week say, "Do you think we're going to get cited for this?" And I said, well, in Texas, probably not. But just the question that is
but
in
if so, you call
everybody's,
Kelly.
everybody's mind, Kelly, until you were able to get that ruling, was at least in the back of the mind, even for my own Sunday school class. And it illustrates why you stand up for some of those religious liberty issues, right?
Yeah, we knew going into this, we immediately sort of put a lot of things online. Like, there's a whole tab at firstliberty.org that says COVID-19, and it just has massive resources, and we have a call every Friday and do all these different things to kind of help churches and everybody understand the religious freedom interplay with the legitimate purposes of public health and safety by the state. And so we did that at the very beginning, but we knew, and we prognosticated that it's not going to take very long before we're going to see abuses, and we've got to be ready to take action, because one of the most important things about this is, everybody talks about the new normal. So in other words, after you come through this, what changes? Well, what we don't want to change is our freedoms, unless they're going to be expanded, but that's not the danger. So we've got to be very vigilant right now in making sure that we come out of this with full and complete freedoms, and that we didn't lose something in this process.
Let's take another phone call real quickly. Then we will get to the guidelines after the break. And in South Carolina, WLPG. Brian, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Well, Kirby, thank you for taking my call. I'd like to say, and then hang up, William Pitt's quote from 1783, his famous quote where he said, "Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It is the argument of tyrants. It is the creed of slaves." Thank you.
Thank you. And just a reminder that whether it's William Pitt or whether it's William Wilberforce or a variety of others, we have to stand up for liberty, don't we? And
we do.
Yeah,
we do. And I think pastors are really important figures right now, because I think they're the ones that are sort of in the crosshairs, and they're the ones, therefore, that have the opportunity to stand up. And again, I know a lot of pastors, they want to make sure that they want to be cooperative, they want to help, and we understand that, but it's really necessary that they stand for the church as well. I bet for these two cases we had for drive-in services, I'll bet there are hundreds of other churches that did not, because they were told not to.
That's right.
And I've gotten lots of those stories.
I'm sure of that.
From even my own family members that said their church was going to do this, and some government official said, don't do that, even though it violated nothing there. And so I just say be very careful about what freedoms you voluntarily surrender. It's one thing to love your neighbor and respect authority and all that's all great when it comes to public health and being safe, but do not lay your freedoms down because it's not going to just affect you, it's going to affect every church.
We'll come back and talk about these guidelines that were set forth yesterday right after these important messages.
In one of those Zoom get-togethers that have become a social lifeline lately, participants were asked to reveal their worst and best experiences during life in the coronavirus lockdown. My worst is an underlying angst and sleeplessness I can't shake as I watched businesses and workers idled and try to swallow the passage of trillions of dollars in relief and stimulus. I could go on about this, and I did, starting our time together on a real downer. My fellow participants rescued the meeting as they began describing the good things they're experiencing as a result of the current limitations. People spoke of how they're finding more time for reflection on their relationship with the Lord. Some see themselves dropping pretenses of control. We find it uncomfortable, even painful, but good to learn to trust God more. Others said they appreciate relaxed dinners with spouses and family members and opportunities to do some long-postponed purging and organizing at home. Many of us agreed we're reaching out more to people who are important to us, often calling rather than emailing or texting. And folks mentioned some sweet opportunities to communicate the gospel and provide help to others. The Wall Street Journal's Peggy Noonan predicted some positives for the nation in her column last weekend. First, she quoted a social psychologist who says, hardship generally makes people stronger. And Ms. Noonan wondered, could what we're enduring leave us less polarized? Not in Washington, she clarified the question, but across America. She wrote, we need to be easier on each other. Turn down the judgment 80% or 90%. I'm rooting for getting the economy opened up sooner rather than later. The spending and the limitations on freedom must be curtailed before they're baked in. But this era of lockdown is forcing practices like more online education and homeschooling, telemedicine, and common-sense immigration restrictions that could prove worthwhile and remain, becoming a silver lining to this dark cloud. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have now the guidelines from the government, and these were set forth by the coronavirus group that has looked at this. And first of all, you had an initial presentation by President Donald Trump, then some comments by Vice President Mike Pence, and then a detailed evaluation and discussion of that by Dr. Deborah Birx, but also they had announced that Dr. Anthony Fauci has agreed with this. So whether we are talking about the economy, which again needs some help, or the health issues, which still need to be addressed, this is, I think, some common sense plans, Penna, that are actually begin to talk about this idea of gating. So maybe you can explain the phased opening and the gating, if you could, for just a minute.
Yes, it's 3 phases of coming back, and before you even start any of the phases, there's supposed to be a downward trajectory of flu-like illnesses and of the COVID-like cases for 14 days. So if you see that downward trajectory of new cases, this isn't deaths, it's new cases, then you can, and of course, this is the national guideline. The governors can then take that. These are guidelines. Governors can take that and implement this in their state. So they can begin then their phase 1. So phase 1 would be, let's see, first I've got to move through this long, and by the way, this is available at pointofview.net, and it's really easy to read, and I think good to have. And it was, for me, it gave me, it made me feel kind of good about this, that there's a good plan out there. Phase 1, states and regions that satisfy the gating criteria, all vulnerable individuals which will still shelter in place.
Right.
And we've said that. We've said, why didn't we just focus on them?
Right.
But here we are. So that's going to be the case. And if you're a member of a household with a vulnerable person, it's not that you're quarantined, but you should be aware that by returning to work in other places where you can't distance, you could be carrying the virus. So it's giving people giving people the freedom to make a calculation. Am I a risky person? And if I've been sleeping on the other side of the house, or have I been sleeping in the same bed with COVID-19 with somebody with that? Secondly, all individuals when in public, parks, outdoor recreation areas, shopping malls should maximize physical distance from others. And social settings of more than 10 people are may not be practical, should be avoided. So again, it's giving you the guideline for you to do with what you think is best. Avoid socializing in groups of more than 10 in circumstances that do not readily allow for appropriate physical distancing, like receptions and trade shows. I've been so sad about all the weddings that have been canceled. Minimize non-essential travel. And then they still want to encourage people to telework whenever possible. And a lot of people, that's worked fine for them. Return to work in phases, and some companies have said, well, we'll have some people come in one day, some come in another day, things like that. Still minimizing non-essential travel, and giving special accommodations to people in your workforce who are vulnerable, part of the vulnerable population. Schools and organized youth activities should remain closed. So this is, what Governor Abbott was talking about, a phase 1, where in Texas all the schools are going to remain closed for the rest of the year. I mean, hopefully we go into phase 2.
Rest of the school year.
But the rest of the school year.
Yes,
Is that what
yeah,
I said? Okay.
yeah.
The rest of the school year. Yes, coming back hopefully in the fall.
Right.
But hopefully by the fall, we're in phase 2 in all of Texas. I hope so. And I hope a lot of the other states too. Visiting senior living facilities and hospitals should be prohibited. I hate this because my dad's in one. But it makes sense. Those who do interact with residents and patients have to adhere to strict protocols. Large venues, strict physical distancing. So if you have a restaurant or whatever, it's very strict. But they're allowed to open. Yes. And elective surgeries can resume. And I think that's good because a lot of hospitals are actually furloughing healthcare workers now because they've cut off all the other non-COVID work that they could.
Yes.
And I don't know if that one was.
I think that was a bad decision.
Yeah.
Because I think that some of these rural hospitals could be closed when you need them out there so that if something does happen COVID-wide, you provide more beds. So I think this is good to move
it's
in
good.
that direction.
I think they probably saw that. And, the healthcare workers, too, you don't want to let them go. You need to try to keep paying them so they're ready when they need to come back. Gyms can be open with strict physical distancing, and bars should remain closed, and yes, they should. Then in phase 2, when you have no evidence of a rebound, because this is where in phase 1, where you have to start watching for the rebounds and the cases going up, and they're probably going to. So you can't go into phase 2, they say, until these states and regions have no evidence of a rebound that satisfy the gating criteria. And so, we have no idea. That could be very different in different places in different parts of the country, depending on the density and depending on the population. So still vulnerable individuals to be sheltered in place there, and you have to keep the physical distancing maximum when in public. And that's going to be something we're going to start getting used to doing. I had a gardener come to my house yesterday, and it was like I just been doing it with delivery people, just staying far away. Our air conditioner broke, and they had to come in and fix it. And I'm starting to get used to it. I think it'll just be something that we do. Even though it's kind of sad not to be able to hug people. Encouraging telework. Continue to encourage telework. This is part of phase 2. Close some of the common areas at your business, but you're having more people come in now, but you're still trying to be careful. You can resume a non-essential travel here. And special accommodations, again, for personnel of a vulnerable population. And then they have a lot about specific types of employers, which I'll let people read. And then what happens if there's no evidence of a rebound in phase 2, and you're opening a lot up in phase 2, it's probably going to take a while to get to phase 3, at least maybe not in some of these areas that have had nothing, but other big cities and things that will take longer. These states have no evidence of a rebound that satisfy the gating criteria. So then vulnerable individuals will be able to come back into public. Low-risk populations can minimize time spent in crowded environments, but they're still out there. And then you'll resume unrestricted staffing of work sites. We're going to be getting back to normal someday. And you have no idea when phase 3 is going to start, in what areas. But one of the things that will also happen is you'll be able to visit senior care facilities and hospitals again. And, we're thinking of the elderly and the vulnerable, and they've been pretty lonely these days. Anyway, then gyms will open up, bars will be able to open up with standing room occupancy, and we'll be getting back to normal.
Yes. Well, when we come back from the break, maybe we can talk about how this plays out, because Ezekiel Emanuel, remember him? 18 months from now, maybe we could actually open up. I don't think anybody around this table agrees with that, and certainly the president didn't. And, of course, a lot of people, those of us who love sports, wonder how in the world are we ever going to go back to actually watching some sports. Sean Hannity was saying, I don't mind watching the New York Yankees with a face mask on, but I don't know how many people are going to want to go with that. So we got a lot more issues to address. And most importantly, even though we've talked about some of the religious liberty issues, we haven't talked about some of the other civil liberties issues, number one. Number two, we have this very important piece about you have to disobey. There's been a real pushback, so that gets us into civil disobedience. And, of course, the first article there, which we'll come back to, is one on the question of how much more should we spend in terms of a stimulus. We're out of money with the Paycheck Protection Program, so whether we should continue to fund that. So we have a lot more to cover, so please take the time to visit the website, pointofview.net. And our action item that we talked about this week is protecting the pharmaceutical supply chain. And this is a piece of legislation that we talked about. Senator Tom Cotton has the Protecting Our Pharmaceutical Supply Chain from China Act. And as we've talked about with Penna Dexter in the past and even talked about this week, if you want to maybe support that idea, you can contact your 2 United States senators, and we'll spend a little more time talking about that in the next hour. But we need to take a break, so visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
2020. Is there anything important happening this year? Well, not unless you consider major disputes in various Christian denominations, international tensions over a flu epidemic, economic uncertainties, and a presidential election important. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It's easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
And now, Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, it is our weekend edition, and if you would like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. You can also leave a question on Facebook, and one of the questions was, did we understand Penna Dexter right when it said phase 1 you could open gyms? Now, I've looked at it a little bit, but I'll turn it over to you, but I think it's in a very limited way. I heard somebody say that if you were to use a piece of equipment, then they're supposed to still wipe it down and all sorts of things. But tell us exactly what happened, because I know there are a number of people who have been wanting to get back to the gym, right? So
this is very general. I don't know why. It seems like gyms would be one that you would wait on, just because it's so much touchy-feely stuff going on. But they can open if they adhere to strict physical distancing and sanitation protocols, and that's the extent of what it says here. But I can imagine that they don't allow too many people in there at once. You probably can't be in the next machine. You've got to be 2 machines away. And every time someone uses a piece of equipment where their skin is touching it, or maybe just whenever they use it, or weights or anything, it has to be disinfected. So there's probably a lot of jobs at gyms now for people that can go around and clean, unless you have to do your own. Maybe you have to do your own. That's gyms. It's that was shocking to me that one opens up, but either, as you guys said, they have a good lobbying group, or it's just been being recognized how we need a stress release and we need to stay physically fit.
So again, if you find yourself saying, I want to see those guidelines for myself, I think there's 18 pages, if I counted right. You can go to our website, pointofview.net. Now, there's a difficulty because one of those links doesn't have a statement in front of it, but it's right between the one on victory for religious liberty and states and houses of worship battle over coronavirus. And if you click on the one that says read now, it shows open up America again. And so you can read those guidelines and print them out and use those, because that's exactly what has been, I think, a consensus that has been developed so far. Now, there's something else, because they've also brought in all sorts of business leaders to kind of plan that out in the future. And at first, when it was announced that Ivanka and all sorts of people like that said, oh, that's not very good. But then we had Tim Cook of Apple, Mark Cuban, who has hardly been a pro-Trumper.
Right.
Nevertheless, the other day, I almost fell out of my chair when he said, I'm going to do all I can to help Donald Trump open America up. I said, maybe we're getting some cooperation, some bipartisanship that I haven't seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think most Americans don't appreciate.
Not from the speaker.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think most Americans don't appreciate the partisanship and the petty. It's a time to unify. When you're under attack, it's a time to be Americans and to just unify. And again, I think that's what we do, no matter whether we like the president or not. I mean, this has just been such a different president in that there is some people that have such a level of hatred that they just can't seem to even do what we do all other times. I mean, they just want to criticize everything instead of try to figure out how people can work together to get the country back in order. What I would say about whatever people think of Trump, I think he's deferred a lot to the experts. I really don't think. I think the advice from the CDC, the advice from the doctors, Fauci and Birx and all this wouldn't be different if there was a different president. I mean, and I don't know if we'd be hearing as much He's decided to make this all public, which I think is great. Some people, that means you have to take a little dose of him, which you don't like, but just focus on the information. And I think that what they've done has been really good as far as trying to provide information. They were wrong about a number of things, and they've been honest about that because it's of transparency. The thing that I would think that Trump is different about that really they should appreciate is whether you like him or not. Number one, he was so into sort of border control that he was much quicker, I think, to shut down the China to the United States than any other president would have been, which I think was a very positive thing for our country. Everybody's admitted. The other thing is that, again, I think this is a no-brainer that anybody that's being fair at all would agree, is he is much about the economy. And other people might be more tempted to just lock things down for longer portions, whereas I think he, as a president, is going to be much more aggressive about trying to get people back to work. I know people say, yeah, but is that going to endanger people? I think people are forgetting why we did the shutdown. The shutdown was not to reduce the number of cases over the long term or even the number of deaths over the long term, because that won't happen. A lot of people are going to end up getting this between now and the next 18 months, and people will die. People who tend to be old and have underlying health conditions. They admitted that right up front. They said this was to flatten the curve because it could overwhelm our healthcare system. The only purpose for the shutdown was to not allow some huge jump right now at the beginning that we wouldn't have enough ventilators, we wouldn't have enough hospital beds. Well, we now know not a single death occurred, unlike what we saw in Italy, where people were dying because you couldn't give them ventilators and there was no hospital. People were, I don't know if everybody saw those pictures in Spain and in Italy, but people were in the hallway of the hospitals, right? None of that happened. Not a single life was lost. So the goal of what they were doing with regard to the health on not losing life because our healthcare system was overwhelmed, they met that goal. And so now as we go back to, opening up for business again, what's going to happen is there are going to be more of these things now occurring. People are going to get it. We're going to have more people get it. They're going to try to make sure we don't get in any situation where we have this huge jump again. But the other reality is we have now had so much occur in the last month or so. We've got ventilators. If one part of the country is getting hit, we can send that from another part of the country. We have people making the protective equipment. We've got American companies who are now making these things. We are in a whole different place where we can handle when the situation occurs now. So there really is no reason to go back into a shutdown, which does cause great damage to people. And I'm not talking about just financial damage. It kills people. People will get addicted to drugs and alcohol. People will be depressed. There will be suicide. People will have stress on their life that will lead to a death sooner than it would because of their heart. I mean, there's on and on and on. We are, with locking down people and not allowing them to work, we are increasing death tolls that way. And I think it's time to move out, which is what we're doing. But people need to remember the goal of this thing was not to make sure nobody ever got COVID-19 or that people didn't die, because they said from the beginning that's not going to be, the numbers are probably not going to be long-term or not going to be reduced by this. It's just a short-term jump that overwhelms the system.
Another thing we've had time to do is change our policy, letting the tests be developed by private labs, because it was all under the control of the CDC and there was a huge bottleneck. So the testing is exponentially increasing now, and the different kinds of tests that will be able to be done will help people to be able to work more safely.
We're going to take a break and come back with a lot more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
G.K. Chesterton once observed, when people stop believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. Dennis Prager starts off with that quote to illustrate that nature has become a substitute God for many today. It's not surprising. Many pagan religions have some form of nature worship. They worship the sun god, the moon god, or the goddess of fertility. Today, there's a religious foundation to the environmental movement. We need to protect Mother Earth. Back in the 1970s, James Lovelock developed the Gaia hypothesis and more recently noted that environmentalism has become a religion. But nature worship has run into some tough times with this virus pandemic. Nature can be beautiful, but nature can also be brutal. Alfred Tennyson described nature as red in tooth and claw. There are no moral laws. It's the survival of the fittest. So how should Christians think about nature? Well, first, nature is part of the fallen world and should not be worshipped. G.K. Chesterton explained, nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. We can be proud of her beauty since we have the same father, but she has no authority over us. Second, in Genesis 1:28, God commands us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. Being fruitful, that is having children, is just the opposite of what environmentalists would allow. One of my professors at Yale was the founder of Zero Population Growth, dedicated to limiting the number of children that could be born. Moreover, environmentalists and animal rights activists reject the idea that humans should subdue nature and have dominion over the earth. An article by Lynn White in the 1960s even blamed Christians and this passage in Genesis for our environmental problems. This pandemic is a reminder that nature is not our friend and nature is not our God. The Christian worldview is the true picture of reality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. Let me take another phone call here. We have one in Illinois talking about healthy people. So, Linda, thank you for joining our conversation today.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've been a long-time listener, started listening when Marlon Maddox was there.
Wow.
And through him, I learned of Barbara Lowe Fisher and the National Vaccine Information Center. And through her organization, I learned about Healthy People 2020, an initiative started in 2010. And one of their goals is to have every American, adult and child, vaccinated with every vaccine that the government thinks that we should have. Well, here we are in 2020, and what better time with a pandemic than to push through this initiative. My concern is a vaccine that's being thrown together in a very short period of time, and the vaccine manufacturers cannot be sued, no matter what kind of damages they might incur on us. We've been hearing about an immunity card, which some people are talking about issuing.
Yeah.
What if we decide we don't want that vaccine that's been thrown together quickly and could have serious side effects? Are we going to be allowed out into society because we don't get the government-mandated vaccine? I'm a nurse. I don't get the flu shot because they are largely ineffective. They contain some things which can cause serious side effects. I don't get the flu. I work at staying healthy, and that's what I plan on continuing to do. But I have some very great concerns that once this epidemic is over and this vaccine comes out, that it's going to be pushed on us or that we will have serious repercussions for not getting it.
Yes.
That's a good point.
Well, I've interviewed Barbara Lowe Fisher many times for Point of View back in, I think, the early 2000s. And I think she's done great work. And I think, as we spoke of religious liberty and the need to protect it now, as this virus is causing some elected officials to clamp down on churches, I think it's the same thing. I'm glad you bring it up, Linda, because with the vaccines, sometimes you have to fight in certain states not to vaccinate if you don't believe in it. And so people have laid a lot of groundwork in the, having freedoms not to vaccinate or to vaccinate, to only take some of the vaccinations or smaller doses or whatever. And so it's good that you bring it up. It's good that she's bringing up that there's a push to force everyone to have every vaccination. And it's something that people who don't want to be vaccinated, who don't believe in it, or who just fear it, should have the right not to. It's something that needs to be, the population needs to be aware of now, and those that are in that movement should begin their work now.
And this has already been happening. I mean, before this, COVID-19 occurred, there was a big battle going on in California and a number of other states where they decided to take away exemptions from these immunizations. And it was already starting to, there was sort of this, and the rationale is that certain things were wiped out in the United States because of herd immunity. That if you get to a certain percentage, then nobody gets it. I don't know if it's 95% or whatever it is, of people who have had the immunization.
Yeah.
And so the argument is that if you don't get it, then you're endangering me and my kids and everything else. And so this is what they've been arguing. Well, traditionally, we've respected in this country exemptions for people who have religious exemptions or conscience exemptions, of people who have a problem. But now there's this attitude of no tolerance for any dissent. And there are a lot of people where, they're passing laws saying, no, we don't care what you believe. We're not allowing anybody. And I think that's really dangerous. And you're right. Now that we have this COVID-19, it's going to be lopping right on top of that. There are going to be people pushing for this, and we're going to be in a battle. And in the past, what I would argue in court on behalf of, those who have a religious objection, et cetera, is there is no problem with providing this. There's zero public health reason if you're not up to the percentage of people who are objecting that you actually affect the herd immunity. In other words, if 1% of the people are saying we have a conscience issue with this, whatever, that's one thing. The danger is when you get to the number where it really does affect that, it's going to be a tough battle as far as a legal battle. So you better win that battle in the legislative and in the public policy process, because I think most judges, if they feel like they're about to endanger, something spreading because, 10%, 20%, however many of the population is going to refuse, I think few judges are going to have the courage to stand against that. But we'll see. But I think it's a really important point that she's making, and I think it's going to be a huge public policy battle. And I encourage people in your states and nationally to really be on top of this, because if you have an objection, they could come at you in the future and say, we're going to take those away.
One of the things we've done in the past is had this whole booklet on privacy and surveillance, but I was suggesting we might do another one just on the whole issue of surveillance right now, because you have big government coming together with big tech and saying, I want to be able to trace you to determine where you've gone based on your cell phone. Or, as certainly she pointed out just a minute ago, Linda, this idea of an immunity passport. May I see your passport, please? Which I was having fun with the other day, because you had the governor of Virginia who completely removed all of the voter ID laws and signed them out. And so now you have a situation which we're saying you could actually vote in this election in places like Virginia and a variety of other places and not have to show any identification. But to leave your house, you might have to show identification. And we turn this on its head. And don't forget to also, Michelle Obama wants to make sure that we all vote by mail. That's the other one that we're hearing about. So a lot
of changes could be made that we don't want to see, and we need to be proactive about it.
That's right. Never let a serious crisis go to waste. I think somebody said said that, didn't
Yes.
they? And that's exactly what seems to be unfolding here as well. Which brings us to a point that I might make, and that is one of our articles is you have to disobey. We have all these people protesting these stay-at-home orders. A lot of those are happening up in Michigan. Boy, the other day you didn't want to go to Lansing, Michigan. It was gridlock, intentional gridlock. But this is another aspect of that, and that's another booklet there on civil disobedience that we're sort of getting into. What happens if there are times when you are being called upon to do something by the civil magistrate that you disagree with? Kelly, you mentioned just a minute ago in Michigan, there are a couple of police officers that are saying, I don't care what the governor says, I'm not going to enforce that particular order.
Yeah, and I would make a distinction a little bit. By the way, I thought what they did in Michigan was brilliant. Because, people aren't ready to go and be a part of a big crowd and protest because of social distancing and the dangers and everything. The idea to have 10,000 people in their automobiles, I thought was brilliant because, again, unless you're in Greenville, Mississippi, you realize that you don't catch the coronavirus from an automobile.
Yes.
And so I thought that was really good. But the distinction I would make is I don't see this as civil disobedience because civil disobedience is when you intentionally violate the law, right?
In this case, you don't enforce it. Okay.
And in this case, I think even if you have an order that says something that's wrong, the United States Constitution is the law of our land. And so I think you have every right to say, no, I am following the law of this land. And in fact, I'm making sure that it stays in place. So I think it's only at the point when maybe you've got a decision throughout the court system or the real answer is we're taking away your freedom and the Constitution doesn't apply that you would have a civil disobedience. So I think in some ways this is civil obedience. This is I'm going to protect our rule of law and our system of liberty and our Constitution that is in place. So I think the whole purpose of what they did in Michigan was something very good for our country.
I might just mention this is a New York Times article, but again, you have a right to disobey. Protesters gather to defy stay-at-home orders. And again, when it goes beyond what is safety, and when, as we have been able to document in this program, that you can't go into a store and buy mosquito repellent, apparently assuming that malaria and West Nile virus and mosquito-borne encephalitis don't exist anymore, or that, our friends up there in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan found, they weren't even allowing you to buy a child car seat, and yet the law requires that children are in car seats. That's where you've gone beyond.
It was draconian.
Yeah.
I love how President Trump has informed the American people and holding these briefings every day. And we understand that people, if they have knowledge, they'll do what's necessary to make things safer. So, all that informing. But this governor in Michigan didn't do that. She just laid out draconian, unexplained regulations and rules and expected people to obey. And this is what she got. 10,000 cars in the Capitol.
Well, we'll take a break. We got a lot more phone calls, and we have a lot more to cover, and we will do that right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Fun Lap Hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll try to get to some of these phone calls. Just as a program note, let me just mention that on Monday, we are going to talk about, are there psychological and mental issues related to the lockdown? We'll have Michael Perrin with us, also Pastor Jack Graham, because they have actually put together a seminar on that. My most recent booklet is on loneliness, because I think that's another issue. I'm running into all sorts sorts of people, especially single people that are not working and they're just within their apartment, and those walls are starting to close in on them. We're seeing in some localities more suicides than people dying of COVID-19. And so we are going to be talking about some of that on Monday. Michael Perrin, of course, deals with some of those issues in terms of health care, and so we'll be talking about that as well. So if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head up to New Hampshire, WSEW. David, thank you for calling.
Thank you. In regard to guidelines, I understand that they have to be formed quickly and universally, like applied to the whole country. But I think some of them are just too rigid. You think about like people in nursing homes or assisted living. My mother-in-law's in an assisted living facility, which is not heavily nursed, means adequate, but it's not full coverage. She's had dementia. And she depends on my sister-in-law, for help and for family, companionship, and just kind of in mental health. You think about physical therapists and speech therapists. My son is autistic. We manage. But, I mean, these could easily be considered essential services. So, but the rule is, no visitors to nursing homes or assisted living facilities. Well, why can't someone, a therapist or a family member who gives care regularly, if they're healthy and they're wearing a mask and they're wearing gloves, why can't they go into these facilities? But it's so rigid, you can't. It's just like, no, cannot, absolutely not. But there's a lot more health at stake here than just whether someone's going to die of a disease or not. It's mental health and deterioration after a stroke, or, you get the point.
It's a really good point. It's kind of something we'll try to cover again on Monday. But these are guidelines. So first of all, they're not rigid. If anything, Penna, as I look at it, and you've looked at it more than anybody probably around the table here, it's the idea that the federal government is giving some general guidelines, but that's going to be individual decisions made by governors, mayors, and maybe even a person that actually is heading up that assisted living facility, right?
Right. Every state will have the opportunity to make its guidelines. And, I'm thinking about those nursing homes and things. They have employees that are still there serving, healthcare employees that are still serving the patients in those those nursing homes. But the assisted living places, they'll have fewer people, but they still have some healthcare workers. But and then the healthy senior places, there's nothing here specifically about that, but the loneliness in those places where they can't have family members visiting them is a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And when you think that, when people are there, they're very old a lot of times, they could die of something else, and they can't have anyone visit and help them through that. That is one of the most tragic things about this, I think. But I also see the way that it just tore through the nursing homes in Seattle, in Washington State, that you understand. I know that my father's in a healthy senior place, and one of its affiliates in Houston, 5 people died of COVID-19 a couple of weeks ago in like a couple-week period. So, they want to be careful about this. These are businesses, and if they've got people, if they're not preventing this, then they're not going to get new patients, so it's not good for their business. But this is tragic for elderly people. The other part of the life of an older person is often they don't know how to get online. They don't know how to take advantage of all the social interactions that we have online through Zoom and things. So, call your loved ones in those places, talk to them on the phone, do the best you can.
Yeah, and one of the suggestions I heard, and I think every place should try to make this available if they don't have it available, is go and visit your relative through a window.
Right.
That you do have interaction that way. I think that's something that not only should be done, but these nursing homes should figure out a way to make that available so that people can do that if they don't have a natural setup where I'm sure they could create a situation where there's a window somewhere where people can do that. But I would say that. The other thing I would say is, like with the caller, call your your government officials. Like, your governor is going to be the one that's really going to make this decision. I don't know if there's a call in each state where a place you can call and give suggestions. Maybe you could just call the health department as one place, but talk about these things so that they think about them. If they don't hear about them, they might not know, and they might come up with a better system. Because, again, the whole idea with the president was the governors are going to make these decisions because they're going to be responsible to the people, and the people need to tell them, you need to think through this. So, for instance, on nursing homes, maybe there's a way that you allow people in because you have testing right there. You do the testing, and before they come in, you make sure they don't know it. So if anybody's going to get enough testing, you would have it there to make sure that there's safety. So there might be other ways to allow for things, in these situations if you suggest it, but it's really up to every state now which of these guidelines and how they're going to do it in each of their states.
I might just mention that next week we're going to have an action item on that to actually give you a chance to contact your governor about those issues. But just before we take a break, I thought we might also mention one of the other action items we've been making available this week. And part of it goes back to a very good commentary that Penna Dexter wrote back in March 27th on China and medicines. And the action item that we have here is certainly tied into something I talked about earlier in the week, and that is Senator Tom Cotton was way ahead of the game. And as the Arkansas senator saw, this was a reason for closing down travel from China, which we did, and a number of other things. But now he's introduced a piece of legislation called Protecting Our Pharmaceutical Supply Chain from China Act. And I just thought, Penna, in light of what you've written about and even what we now know, even this week, that maybe this did indeed come from a virus from the Wuhan laboratory, this is just an opportunity for people to click on that button and to just put their name and address there. And then it will send out a letter that they can modify if they want to their 2 United States senators. And I think it's about time, given the fact that, as you first wrote about, a majority, more than half of all the elements that go into the pharmaceuticals that some of us around the table over the years have taken, or certainly our friends, neighbors, and coworkers have taken, come from China. It's time to bring that back to the United States, don't you think?
Yeah, and China is not like a benevolent trading partner in all of these cases. In fact, when they started manufacturing a lot of the components for drugs and some of our antibiotics, they lowered the price. They have these kind of cartels there. They lowered the price on purpose, and then it just took the incentive away for Western countries to produce it. So everybody was getting it from China, and then they could raise the price later when we were all dependent on it. We closed up all our manufacturing. So that's the situation we're in now, where it's so difficult to get some of the components of drugs, especially generic drugs. That cannot. If we learn one lesson from this crisis about China, that's it. We've got to bring all of our manufacturing for pharmaceuticals back to our country, and other Western countries should do the same. And kudos to Tom Cotton, and there's a Congressman Gallagher in the House that's also introducing a bill, a similar companion bill for that.
Yeah, I think this will be a bipartisan effort. I mean, the only danger is how much China is contributing to some of these campaigns, and whether that's going to be a problem getting it through. But hopefully that's exposed to the extent that it's happening. But yeah, it's very important, and it's not just. I think this should wake us up, not just for drugs, but for anything that is necessary, whether it's necessary for our health, or whether it's even necessary for like our military defense, or you think about all these things. We got to think through them all and make sure. Because China has a specific goal of being dominant over us, and so we've got to be very careful about what we depend upon from China.
And if nothing else, the example I love to use is that once we got closer to energy independence, we then weren't dependent on countries that don't like us very much, and we weren't sending money to countries that then funneled it to the terrorists. So this is the same kind of thing. So it's a great action item, and we have posted it on the website. You can go back and find Penna Dexter's commentary. Matter of fact, in just a minute, if you're listening on computer, you'll hear her commentary for today. And when we come back, I do want to get political for just a minute, because one of the articles we posted, Penna, that you gave us a suggestion, more stimulus could crush the recovery. Also, we've run out of money for the Paycheck Protection Program. So what about some of these political issues, and what should Congress do? We'll talk about that right after this.
In one of those Zoom get-togethers that have become a social lifeline lately, participants were asked to reveal their worst and best experiences during life in the coronavirus lockdown. My worst is an underlying angst and sleeplessness I can't shake as I watched businesses and workers idled and try to swallow the passage of trillions of dollars in relief and stimulus. I could go on about this, and I did, starting our time together on a real downer. My fellow participants rescued the meeting as they began describing the good things they're experiencing as a result of the current limitations. People spoke of how they're finding more time for reflection on their relationship with the Lord. Some see themselves dropping pretenses of control. We find it uncomfortable, even painful, but good to learn to trust God more. Others said they appreciate relaxed dinners with spouses and family members and opportunities to do some long-postponed purging and organizing at home. Many of us agreed we're reaching out more to people who are important to us, often calling rather than emailing or texting. And folks mentioned some sweet opportunities to communicate the gospel and provide help to others. The Wall Street Journal's Peggy Noonan predicted some positives for the nation in her column last weekend. First, she quoted a social psychologist who says, hardship generally makes people stronger. And Ms. Noonan wondered, could what we're enduring leave us less polarized? Not in Washington, she clarified the question, but across America. She wrote, we need to be easier on each other. Turn down the judgment 80% or 90%. I'm rooting for getting the economy opened up sooner rather than later. The spending and the limitations on freedom must be curtailed before they're baked in. But this era of lockdown is forcing practices like more online education and homeschooling, telemedicine, and common-sense immigration restrictions that could prove worthwhile and remain, becoming a silver lining to this dark cloud. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about some of the political aspects of this, because after all, there is a political campaign, and also Congress really needs to act on a few of these issues. And Penna, one of the articles that you posted, you had suggested, and we have posted, it's with the Wall Street Journal. Now, if you don't get a subscription to Wall Street Journal, you probably could not read it, so that's why I encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. It is written by Phil Graham and Michael Salone, and this is the question of more stimulus would crush the recovery. Explain that, if you might.
Well, all this money that the government's giving out in stimulus, paycheck protection, all of that, these have all been well thought out programs for the most part and necessary. But it's basically printing money. It's basically borrowing. And if there's any more borrowing, if there's too much borrowing, and I don't know when you hit that, yeah. This article by Phil Graham and Michael Salone says this will consume all the oxygen needed once the recovery is underway. Businesses coming back will need to raise capital and will be competing directly with the federal government for funding funding. So the recovery is going to need businesses to get out there and get moving. They don't need the federal government to be the lender of last resort and to be the provider of funding. So, yes, this is, you can argue about these policies, but they're there. And I still think that the Paycheck Protection Bill should be refunded because it's run out, and it's a good idea. It's helping businesses be bridged through this. It's a loan, but it will be forgiven if they use it for employee payroll and paying the rent and things like that. So, Phil Gramm and Michael Salon just make some very good points about the recovery. Unless we're going to have Washington lead fund and direct the recovery, you don't want to get people dependent on Washington for everything. Instead of relying on private capital and initiative and our free enterprise system, all this new government borrowing will be consuming that oxygen that I mentioned before. They say the responsible approach would be for Congress to delay considering any new spending after this. Let these first three programs do the work that they were designed to do until they are implemented fully, and they haven't been. I mean, we're hearing already complaints about delays in getting the funding from these programs. So let them do their work. Let that money sift down to the businesses. Yeah, there's some pain because it's taking a little bit longer, but and perhaps you can shift funds out of programs that aren't working too. But a new bill, number 4, needs to be rethought and delayed. We don't need to do that right now. They say if another massive spending bill is passed, the capacity of private businesses and banks to lead the recovery could be smothered. It would only be a short leap for Democrats to demand certain kinds of programs, like after the Great Depression, and call for the Federal Reserve to serve as the recovery lender. So, we don't want this big role the federal government has to be a permanent role. And there's some people on the left that like those kinds of things. So this is a time, as with religious liberty, as with vaccines and everything else, we need to be vigilant and aware, and we need to watch what we allow the federal government to take on, lest it become baked in.
Yeah, the last thing we need is more government, spending.
We've got it, but we would more.
That's not the answer. And again, the Paycheck Protection, it's a little different because the government's the ones that shut down these businesses, so they're trying to help.
And while you're coughing there, I'll pick up one other point that I know that you've made in the past, and that is, in the best of all worlds, it would have been a lot better to have been surgical rather than universal, because there are a lot of businesses, for example, like FedEx and Amazon and a lot of the grocery stores that have still been doing quite well. But then there are others that are actually closing down. And the same thing true about some of these individuals, because everybody theoretically is going to be getting their $1,200 check or the $2,400 check. Some people are still working, and that's nice that they can get it, but they don't need it. And others just are having difficulty even paying the rent. So I understand that they want to try to be fair, but in some respects, not wanting to, as they say, choose winners and losers, sometimes ends up sending money to some people that don't really need it when some people need it desperately now.
Yeah, and that's what happened with Paycheck Protection. It was used up so quickly. People went out and applied as they were encouraged to do, and now the money's gone. And, of course, the Democrats have not been cooperative in trying to refill that ability to get money out to businesses because they want to add several things to the bill.
Well, let's talk about that for just a minute, because that's the other aspect of this. First of all, Congress technically isn't even in session, but technically is in session. So realistically, it's not. But what has happened right now is you've had the president say, look, either convene the Senate so that we can get these nominees to the courts and these nominees to parts of the bureaucracy, or else close it down so I can give a recess appointment. And at the same time, let's have Congress come back here and deal with this $250 billion allocation. So you've got this situation right now where Congress really isn't in session, but technically it is through kind of a pro forma, and that's something that needs to change pretty quickly as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is a strange time because actually Congress, if they can pass something on unanimous consent, they can do it online. And I think that this Paycheck Protection refill should be able to be done. They don't have to bring them to Washington to do that. necessary. They've already had the philosophical argument about it.
Yeah.
It just needs to be more money.
And again, why can't we use Zoom like everybody else is
Yeah.
using in these situations? Kelly, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one thing, again, businesses were shut down by the government, and so the Paycheck Protection Plan, the idea was that we're going to cover their payroll for 2 months to keep everybody open. Most people still don't, I don't think anybody yet has their money. Why? Well, number one, because Nancy Pelosi drugged this out for an extra week to try to put a bunch of other stuff on here that has nothing to do with the crisis. Schumer, the Democrat leader in the Senate, there was an agreement.
Yes.
And then she came back and decided to blow this up, to play politics with this for a whole week. It was delayed. So that's one of the reasons why all these businesses don't have their money. And now they're doing the same thing, that they've run out of money in this, and they don't. A lot of people put in for this, and they're not going to get it until they get a little more money in here. And again, she's delaying again the ability of people to get the money. By the time they get the money, it's going to be too late. We're going to be maybe starting to open back up in a lot of these places, and they're going to be done for because they didn't get the money last week or the week before or this coming week. So I think this is really reprehensible conduct by Nancy Pelosi. I mean, it really is not a time to play politics. They need to get these businesses their money so that they don't have to shut down, fire all their employees. I just can't believe that this is a time where everybody comes together, and I thought they had done that until Nancy Pelosi kind of started doing this with these bills.
Well, just before we run out of time, again, one of the arguments that we were trying to get you to do, one of the action items was on the pharmaceutical supply chain. But, Kelly, we also have a link to First Liberty, and you have some things on 2 powerful victories to save drive-in churches, preaching from the rooftops and worshiping on wheels. So if people would like to know a little bit more about First Liberty or look at some of these victories, what can they do and how can they find it?
We have just a ton of stuff at our website, obviously. We have a whole section on COVID-19 and how religious freedom works with that and everything. But I would just say, if you do nothing else, take that article that's at pointofview.net. It's also at First Liberty, the one where you see Tucker Carlson on there. Share that with people so they can see what's going on with churches, and more churches can realize they have rights and freedoms. And I think it'll wake a lot of people up to what's going on.
Well, we're out of time before we're out of content. Penna and Kelly, thank you very much. Andrew and Steve, thank you for your help behind the scenes as well. Have a great weekend. And don't forget, on Monday, we're going to talk a little bit more about this important issue right here on Point of View.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.